Neon looks soft when it bounces off rhinestones, but in old Nashville, that shimmer covered contracts, written in disappearing ink, grudges sealed with gospel smiles, and heartbreaks packaged as wholesome Sunday stories. People still called these women angels, queens, sweethearts. Like charm was lace instead of armor, yet every honeyed note hit a switchblade. Stay. Because a supposed abduction still tears a family apart, a teen rebel haggled over royalties before she could legally vote, and a redheaded mogul rebuilt an empire from ashes and stage lights. The first crack in Music Row's wall wasn't a scream, it was a calm sip of coffee, while a band record spun anyway. Kitty Wells looked church social prim, but when she fired back with, "It wasn't God who made honky-tonk angels," phone lines melted and station managers panicked. She didn't storm the gate. She straightened her hem, labeled the door "Gentlemen Only," and stepped through without blinking. Patsy Cline followed, voice smoky enough to fog a windshield and temper hot enough to dent it. She survived a crash that should have ended everything, then came back swinging, telling pushy execs exactly where they could file their notes. Gene Shepard, sharp as barbed wire, blasted hypocrisy on air, called out fake patriotism, and shrugged when Nashville suits clutched their pearls. Polite? Sure, until politeness stopped working. Then came the fire starters. Tammy Wynette told the world faceless thugs dragged her from a parking lot, roughed her up, dumped her like trash. Headlines prayed, fans wept. Decades later, her own daughter held hospital photos and swore the story masked bruises from husband-manager George Ritchie. Investigators whispered about gaps, doctors raised eyebrows, and the legend of a stage snatch never really died. Loretta Lynn wrote lyrics the censors hated, tossed truth like gravel at men's shiny trucks, and watched The Pill get banned while small-town moms hummed it anyway. She swung at barroom egos before arenas ever knew her name. Dottie West glittered like a Vegas chandelier, slid into duet scandals, and died after a crash that still sparks murmurs about pressure, money, and who failed her when it mattered. Teenagers usually fight for car keys. Tanya Tucker fought for publishing splits. 13, a voice like diesel rumbling tabloid romances slapped on her back before 9th grade finished. She wore "Wild Child" like a dare, but behind it was a kid learning to read clauses faster than homework. Brenda Lee, Little Miss Dynamite, sounded sugar sweet, yet in boardrooms she was steel, politely bulldozing anyone who tried shaving a penny off her cut. Barbara Fairchild smiled like a pageant winner while nudging producers toward darker stories she actually cared about, proving soft edges can hide iron cores. Charm is leverage, and a few women turned it into artillery. Dolly Parton wrapped jokes around daggers, pigtails around patents. When Porter Wagoner tried to cage her, she wrote a farewell that paid his bills and bought her freedom. Grief carved holes in her life, but she poured concrete over them and built Dollywood, publishing houses, and a literacy empire. Reba McEntire lost most of her band in a plane crash, steadied her voice, and transformed tragedy into laser-focused control of branding, TV, touring, even fashion racks at the mall. Barbara Mandrell tap-danced, shredded guitar, hosted variety TV, and caught backlash for being too perfect, too everywhere, until a near-fatal car wreck turned tabloids into vultures, inventing theories while she relearned basics, like walking. Outlaw energy isn't just for leather jackets. Jessie Coulter moved through smoke and spotlight beside Waylon, but kept her own mystique, turning chaos into aching ballads. Wanda Jackson brought rockabilly heat, fringe flying, rumors swirling about Elvis whispers and backstage sparks, while preachers wrote sermons about her hemlines. Skeeter Davis sang like spun sugar, then shattered on the Opry stage after personal loss, ranting about industry hypocrisy live, proving sweetness can snap when pressure keeps tightening. Glam could be a weapon too. Crystal Gale's hair hit the floor, a brand you couldn't forget. But behind that curtain of silk, she battled to stand apart from Sister Loretta's shadow and to steer her own career without constant compare and copy calls. Lynn Anderson handed the world a rose garden, then tabloids gleefully pounced on her DUIs, twisting slips into character verdicts. Billy Joe Spears got dropped, blacklisted, muttered about as too bold, then clawed back with hits that made the naysayers choke on their coffee. Some smiled like Sunday school teachers while quietly reloading. Connie Smith, often called one of the greatest voices in country, wrestled with faith, depression, and sudden disappearances from the spotlight that sent rumor mills spinning. June Carter Cash disarmed crowds with jokes, but behind the curtain she juggled Johnny Storms, ran quiet damage control, and allegedly kept the kind of detailed ledgers only a woman tired of surprises would maintain. And threading through them all is that razor question: were they seductresses or survivalists in sequins? Nashville loved to package them as pure or tragic or spicy, but never too loud, never too smart, never openly ambitious. So they hid teeth in harmonies, smuggled demands inside love songs, and let managers believe they were steering right up until the checks cleared in the right account. Contracts got slipped back unsigned. Banned singles mysteriously found airtime. Good Girl images sold records while backroom negotiations redrew royalty maps. Even the scandals, abductions contested, affairs hinted, addictions coded as exhaustion, needles described as vitamins, quiet exits framed as rest, became chess moves in a game they weren't supposed to know how to play. Patsy's ghost still stomps through every rehearsal where a woman tells a producer no. Kitty's calm coffee sits beside any mic where someone's about to sing something the suits begged her to shelve. Tammy's bruised myth lingers whenever an artist's version of events doesn't line up with the people holding her calendar. Loretta's band lyrics echo each time radio decides a truth is too much for our demographic. Tanya's teenage stare glares across every contract pushed at a kid with a dream. Dolly's laugh covers every ruthless pivot that saves a career without burning bridges. Reba's controlled burn after tragedy teaches that grief, managed right, can become jet fuel. Mandrell's choreography reminds you perfection brings knives from critics faster than imperfection ever will. Jesse's low, smoky mysteries whisper from every outlaw ballad sung by someone who watched the chaos and learned where to stand. Wanda's wild swagger still pulses in guitar licks that scare conservative programmers. Skeeter's crack on stage warns that insisting on sweetness forever is a cruelty masked as branding. Crystal and Lynn, Billy Joe and Connie June with that quicksilver wit, they're the blueprint for smiling while you sharpen the pen. 20 names, 20 detonations, one pattern. The rules worked only when they obeyed, and they didn't. So next time a classic spins during Sunday dinner, listen for the thud under the twang, the sound of a door being kicked a little wider. Were they dangerous seductresses, or women who learned the only way to survive a boys' club built on backslaps and Bible quotes was to flirt, faint, and, when necessary, fight? Drop your pick in the comments. Which story rattled you, and who did Nashville misjudge the worst? And if you're still humming along, you already know the answer. Every halo here had horns tucked just out of frame. Take Patsy again. Studio guys loved to brag they discovered her, but she was the one who walked in and demanded strings, not fiddles, on Crazy. And when insurers balked at letting her tour after the wreck, she stared them down until the policy bent. Friends swore she could flip from honey to hurricane mid-sentence, and that whiplash became currency. Nobody forgot the woman who could flatten you with a glare and then hug your kids before sound check. That duality scared execs more than any bar fight because how do you market a thunderstorm that also bakes pies? Kitty kept pretending she didn't notice the stir she caused, but her quiet moves taught everyone else the sneakier route. Say less, sign smart, smile wider. She stocked her kitchen with reporters' favorite pies, then fed them quotes so bland they printed her lyrics instead, accidentally promoting the song they'd been told to ignore. Behind that apron was an accountant's brain, clocking every spin, every royalty penny, every back-end trick labels loved to hide behind legal fog. Gene Shepard's radio rants weren't accidents either. She knew live mics were time bombs. She just chose when to light the fuse. One night, she tore into a fake Patriot merch line that slapped flags on anything that moved, said real love of country didn't need glitter. Program directors snipped the tape, but callers flooded in, and suddenly the station couldn't pretend she didn't exist. She weaponized sincerity like others weaponized sparkle. Tammy's tale is still a bonfire nobody wants to stomp out. Her daughter says one thing, old friends say another. The paperwork hints at timelines that don't quite hug. Maybe the truth lives somewhere in the bruised between, where a woman so marketed as fragile learned that a headline about danger could keep the truly dangerous at bay. She kept making ballads that sounded like surrender, but hid blueprints for escape in the bridge. Every Stand By Your Man chorus carried a side-eye verse if you listened with history in your ears. Loretta, meanwhile, never pretended to be delicate. She called pills pills, cheating cheating, and being broke exactly what it was. When censors swung, she laughed and played the song anyway, knowing that banning something in a town that loves gossip is like locking dynamite in a glass case. She hammer-tapped the glass with every show. Somewhere in the back row, a teenage girl heard "The Pill" and realized lyrics could be armor, not just confession. Dottie West turned sequins into a second skin because she understood how flash distracts predators. She glittered so bright folks forgot to check the contract lines, and by the time they did, she'd slid a better clause into place. The wreck that took her still feels wrong because everything about her career screamed survivor, problem solver, comeback queen. Whispers that a friend rushed her, that pressure trumped prudence, keep echoing because Nashville hates admitting it fails its own glam saints. Tanya grew up in a maze of handlers, stylists, and lawyers, yet she learned the layout faster than the adults. She'd peek at paperwork while somebody powdered her nose, ask a question about publishing just to watch the room flinch, stash the answer for later. Publicly, they painted her wild. Privately, they feared the teenager who already knew how to walk when pushed and how to run when doors cracked. The romance rumors were chum in the water. She let tabloids feed, then snatched her check while they chewed. Brenda Lee was 5 feet of hurricane control. People loved calling her cute. She banked the compliment, then pointed to the clause that said artist approval required. When labels sent her songs she hated, she smiled, baked cookies, and sent them back scribbled with notes in red ink. That mix of grandma sweetness and courtroom precision made executives assume she must have a secret army. She did, herself, a pen, and a brain trained by necessity. Barbara Fairchild learned early that syrup sells, but shadows stick longer. She tricked producers by pitching soft tunes with edges hidden in the metaphor, knowing that once a melody lodged in Middle America's ears, the message would leak later. If they balked, she'd swap a word, ease a line, slide the darker thought under a different verb. That was her kind of stealth, rewriting the rules without shouting about the rulebook. Dolly felt every camera like a sun lamp, so she wore reflectors. She turned jokes into shields, self-mockery into camouflage, and kindness into a boomerang that always came back with interest. Her parting song to Porter wasn't just a goodbye, it was a masterclass in monetizing pain. Years later, when industry folks tried to box her as nostalgia, she built an actual box, a theme park, and filled it with jobs, families, parades, and a library program. Try canceling a woman who can throw a county fair every day. Reba's fire didn't explode, it simmered. After the crash, she could have folded into sympathy forever. Instead, she sharpened her red and her resolve, built a production company, fronted sitcoms, sold clothes your aunt and your niece would both wear. She learned every camera angle, every merch margin, every touring trick because grief taught her time is the only currency you can't renegotiate. Watch her interviews. She grins, but the eyes are spreadsheets. Barbara Mandrell's perfection scared people who never met perfection up close. They called her too much, which usually means too good at things we can't spin. The wreck that broke her body gave gossips permission to invent, but she turned rehab into a storyline of grit, then quietly stepped back when the noise no longer matched the music in her head. Some said she vanished. She'd say she clocked out early with her dignity intact. Jessie Coulter moved like cigarette smoke, seen, smelled, impossible to hold. The Outlaw Boys got headlines, but her haunting keys and velvet ache were the glue between their chaos and the crowd. She watched tempers flare, bottles fly, writers get rewritten at midnight, and she distilled all that static into songs that felt like secrets. Call it seduction if you want. She'd call it translation. Wanda Jackson didn't bother explaining herself to sermons. She'd toss a shrug, hike the fringe, and kick into a growl that made preachers blush harder than anything. Elvis may or may not have been more than a tour mate, but the whispers helped ticket sales, so she let them ride. Her true romance was with volume knobs and tempo, cranking both until polite society had to either dance or leave. Skeeter Davis hit a wall. The night she blasted the Opry for hypocrisy and management acted shocked, as if sorrow should always stay off mic. Her meltdown was really a manifesto. Stop demanding eternal sunshine from women hauling storms. Afterward, they tried to shelve her as unstable, yet the audience letters poured in, thick with gratitude. She'd cracked the doll case and showed the splinters inside. Crystal Gale's hair looked like a fairy tale, but maintaining it took discipline bordering on militant. That discipline spilled into meetings where she would calmly correct anyone who suggested she ride her sister's wake. She wanted jazz chords, pop crossovers, whatever paid without pigeonholes. When they insisted on comparisons, she'd smile and cut another hit just different enough to force a new paragraph in the review. Lynn Anderson had an image as bright as that rose garden she offered, and the first time flashing lights showed up behind her car, vultures circled. She admitted mistakes, did the programs, but the narrative stuck because purity stories sell. So she flipped it, leaned into humor, took control of her own press, and turned missteps into human texture. Perfect is boring. Lynn figured out how to be fascinating on her own terms. Billy Joe Spears came back like a slingshot. Dropped by a label that claimed the market had shifted, she toured harder, sang deeper, and made a record so undeniable programmers had to pretend they discovered her twice. The whispers that she was difficult usually translated to won't sign garbage deals, and she wore that badge under her jacket like Kevlar. Connie Smith fought shadows you couldn't photograph. When faith tangled with fame and depression yanked the mic away, people invented motives to explain her pauses. She let them. Silence was sometimes medicine, sometimes negotiation, sometimes both. When she returned, the voice was unchanged. Pure steel over silk. Proof that stepping back isn't weakness, it's weapon maintenance. June Carter Cash could cut a man down with a punchline and stitch him up with harmony before he noticed he was bleeding. Everyone remembers the love story with Johnny, but fewer talk about the spreadsheets, schedules, and quiet ultimatums that kept the whole circus upright. She smiled while she said no, and somehow the no sounded like a hug. That's advanced sorcery in any business, especially one fueled by egos and amps. And when the credits rolled, none of them waited backstage for permission to exit. They stepped into night air thick with neon buzz and diesel smoke, counted their scars like trophies, and kept walking. Nashville learned slowly that a smile can be a snare and a chorus can rewrite law. The lesson stuck even if the town pretends it didn't, permanently.